Hi, I am Brittany Hall, a program coordinator at Yukon Solid Ground, and we are doing a DIY series, and today we're talking about farm hacks. So we are here at BOTL Farm in Ashford, and we're talking to the owner, Nick. So Nick, can you tell us a bit about your farm, your products, and where folks can find you?
Yeah, so I'm Nick Livestock, the owner and operator of BOTL Farm. We're located in the northeast corner of the state in Ashford. We focus on pork, but we do lamb, goat, and laying hens. Everything on our farm is animal welfare approved. Everything is fed a certified organic feed, no corn, no soy, raised on pasture year round. You can find us at assorted farmers markets. Up in Sturbridge is our big market. We team up with Ossabaga Farm in Putnam. We do Tallinn farmers markets, and then we have an online store and a farm store twice a week here on farm.
So like I said, we're talking about farm hacks and like DIY things farmers do on their farms to make their lives easier. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the problem you were having before was and how you decided to use DIY to solve it?
Yeah, so it wasn't a problem I necessarily had before because we're moving animals on pasture. Need to move some sort of shelter with them, whether it's shade shelter during the hot summer days, a rain shelter, goats hate rain, winter shelter. You need some sort of shelter to move them, and because we're year-round on pasture, it's not a permanent structure, so it needs to move. So this was our very first version 1. Okay. We've done lots of different versions from here. The initial build concept was it was built tall enough that for some reason we thought we needed to be able to get in and out ourselves comfortably. Turns out most of our animals, sheep and goats and pigs, are only waist high, so we don't need them to actually be this tall. Basically the design is it gets picked up with our tractor, with forks on our tractor from the top section. They can be moved anywhere on the farm. They can be lifted up and over fences. So when I have animals in a paddock, I don't have to open a gate to move the tractor in, to move the shelter in, and the animals run out at the same time. I can move the animals and then come later and move the shelter into their area. The design constraints were how high can my tractor lift? Because I need the bottom of the shelter at max height to clear the top of a 4-foot high fence. So that's what dictated this height. This is the tallest shelter we could build. The length of my forks were 4 feet long. So that dictates the length of the shelter. The middle of my shelter is a 7-foot shelter. So the balance is right there. And then the width is based on sheet good dimensions. So a 4-foot sheet at the top, and then splitting that down the sides. There were 2 4-foot sheets initially, and a 2-foot sheet at the bottom, just to fully utilize material. And
were you like trying to have a certain number of animals be able to fit in there comfortably?
Not necessarily.
So like materials and...
It was materials and ease of movement. So the idea was, as my flocks grew, my herd sizes grew, I could add additional shelters or subtract additional shelters. So they all have the same footprint of 7-foot by 7-foot square.
We're at another version, so there's obviously some changes, more than just the height. So it looks like you also added a half wall. So do you want to walk me through some of the changes you made? Yeah,
so the half wall on both ends, if you maybe or may not saw on the other one, had a pallet on one side. That was specifically for winter, to stop cold air from blowing through. The pallets worked pretty good for the first few years until I realized every year I'm putting a pallet on, I'm taking a pallet off. Why not just make this more permanent? It also helps with additional shade sheltering. I don't have to specifically have the shelters turned to avoid the shade, because they're still going to block the shade from the ends. Another modification we made, some of them have hay feeders on the side. These would go on and off winter and summer. They're old busted pieces of perimeter fencing. When they bust up, I take them, I fold them in half, and then just screw them on, screw them straight through. So before this one goes back into use, it'll get a few more screws. The rails on the outside became more critical at the lower heights, so my goats can climb and get up on top. We initially put it on the beginning structures as more of a structural thing, but then we realized the goats really love it, and it just gives them additional space. And then the other major difference is we switched to a lot more on-farm milled lumber. The roof is still a waterproof plywood, Advantech. We paint them anyway just to give them extra longevity. The rest of it is pine cut from the farm. The structure itself is 2x6s, cut a true 2x6. The initials were 2x4s and they weren't holding up long term, although a commercial 2x6 would hold up just fine. So the sidewalls are 1x paneling. We've done a few different notching, just overlapping. So we did a shiplap one year and that was a lot to cut in. The final versions just have a 45 cut. They don't need to be 100% watertight, just enough to keep them relatively dry. And then every main joint is lag bolted together. So they get assembled first with a nail gun, just 2 or 3 nails into each piece to kind of get the frame held together, and then we go back through and lag bolt the main connections.
So how much do you think it normally costs you to make one of these?
So because we mill all our own lumber here, that's a hard question. So hardware and the top piece of plywood, I'm about $180, including paint. It's about another $200 in retail costs to get the rest of the wood. Obviously our costs are a little bit cheaper because we can mill that here, but there's still a cost in milling. And
how long do you think it takes? Is it just you that makes them, or do you have someone that helps you out?
My brother-in-law does most of the milling because he loves running the mill. So
good to have someone like that.
I give him an order list and he cuts and makes big stacks of them, and then I batch them out in usually batches of 6 when I'm building them. So I'll build one perfect end frame exactly how I like it, and I'll use that as a template on the ground. I'll build up sides so I can just drop lumber on top, quickly nail them in place and stand it up, and I can knock them out pretty quickly. It's all very rough cut. There is no real precise measurements here. Again, it's on a farm. It's going to be twisted. If I build it perfectly, as soon as I bring it out to the field, it's going to twist and move. So them overhanging a little bit or a little short in places, it doesn't really matter. So it's usually a few day process. Because I'm batching out 6. I can do the frames in about a day or so. There's 3 frames per. There's the 2 end and there's a middle frame. The middle frame does not have a bottom rail on it, but that is where the forks rest in the very middle. And then the sheeting usually takes about 2 to 3 days to do all of them, and a day or 2 to paint. I have published the designs. We have a GitHub website. github.com/BOTL Farm, and I think this is /portable shelters, but you can see all of our open source projects on there. Full set of drawings, material lists, build pictures, 3D model in case you wanted to modify and re-get new material cut lists from that. It's all available.
What are some other changes you made for these?
Because we give them to pigs we give our pigs the option to farrow in them. They're out on pasture. We give them a shelter when they're about to farrow. Whether they choose to use it or not is up to them. But if they do use it, we have some inside rails that we did put on, and those just get attached to the 3 frames. So it's just a 1x3 that runs along the 2 sides, and that keeps, if she does use it as her farrowing area, her rolling over and crushing babies. They have the escape. They can even come all the way underneath for the escape. For
this latest model, how often do you find yourself making repairs?
They're pretty robust, so not super often. I've been building new batches kind of every year, and at that same point I'll bring in old ones that need repair to work on them at the same time, or really just touch up paint, especially on the plywood. That's going to be the quickest thing that rots out. So even my first ones that are about 6 years old now, that design has changed quite a bit, but the only real repair that is needed is the bottoms start rotting out, so they'll get pieces put back on them. So
what do future versions of this look like?
Yeah, so I'm always looking at it as I use them day to day, looking at modifications, what would be really nice. And I haven't quite figured out how to do it yet, but I want to figure out a way to stack multiple ones just to move them around the farm. So right now, if I need to move it from here to the far end of my field, I got to make 1 trip for each one. And because I'm moving potentially 15 of them, it's a lot of trips back and forth. It's definitely going to take a lot more geometry to figure out and a lot more work to properly build, but in the long run it may be worth it, and I may, for my next batch, start playing with that. Sometimes coming up with DIY ideas for your farm can seem really overwhelming. Where do you normally start? Like, if you were giving advice to other folks, like how do you get started? I always start at I've got to do something for the first time ever is where I start. So I needed shelters. I looked at how other people did it. I do a lot of research on what is out there. And because my background isn't in farming, my background is in construction, I always look at things differently of why have farmers done it this way for years? There's probably a better way, or maybe there's not a better way. There's definitely a different way. And let me put something together, see if it is better. Maybe it's not, but we're only going to figure out and make changes by actually trying. And that's why even the design what we initially saw has changed significantly over the years. Every time I build, I might modify one thing or another. All
right, well, thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely.
It's been really great talking to you about this really cool project.
Thanks for coming out.